What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the reveal of the number 4 team in my 2021 NFL Power Rankings, as we are going to take a deep dive into the Los Angeles Rams. Before we get started, a quick reminder to please do hit that like button down below. It really does help me out and support the channel. Also, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss an upload as we count down to the number 1 team in this series and get into my regular season content. And lastly, I am thrilled to announce that I am now partnering with one of my favorite brands out there, Magic Spoon Cereal. And if you are like me and you're looking for a healthy way to implement a tasty product into your daily routine, well, Magic Spoon is absolutely perfect, man. I actually reached out to them because I use Magic Spoon every single day. It gives you the taste of the cereals of old. You can go peanut butter, frosted. You guys know what brands I'm talking about. Tastes very similar, but just without the carbs. It's keto friendly and it's high in protein, so it keeps you filled really up until lunchtime. I eat it every single day. I reached out to them and I wanted to share that product with you. And if that sounds good to you, head over to magicspoon.com and use promo code FranchiseGuy, where you'll save $5 on your first purchase and support my channel in the process. So that's promo code FranchiseGuy at Magic Spoon. Go check it out. But let's go ahead and get into the Los Angeles Rams, who come in all the way up at number 4 in my power rankings. And this is a team that has really risen the bar this summer, making a blockbuster trade, sending their quarterback Jared Goff for Matthew Stafford of the Lions. And they're hoping that that is a move that can really help this team take that final step and bring a ring home to Los Angeles, because it has been elusive for them, and they have been missing that kind of next gear with this offense. And they're hoping that Matthew Stafford can be that guy that takes them to that level. So we'll talk about Matthew Stafford, but he can't do it alone. So we'll talk about the rest of this roster as well. We'll rank each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league, and talk about some of the more pivotal players that will need to step up if they're going to accomplish that goal of winning a Super Bowl here. But let's start by talking about this team's offseason that had a lot of movement here. Of course, the quarterbacks flipping around here as they're going to send Jared Goff to the Lions and acquiring Matthew Stafford, but also some significant staff changes here as well, as their defensive coordinator Brandon Staley takes a head coach offer from the Los Angeles Chargers, and that's going to be something that they need to replace. Now, they made a hell of a hire, bringing in Raheem Morris, who I thought was really impressive, really in about a 6-7 week stretch, accomplished something Dan Quinn couldn't do as the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, and that's get that team to play defense, and he had about an eighth of the time to do that. He really does seem like a guy that will improvise his scheme and adjust to his players' strengths, just as Brandon Staley did so well. And it seems that Raheem Morris is going to come in and really kind of pick up where Brandon Staley left off schematically with this team. So while it is a new man in charge of the defense as McVay handles the offense, I do think that was one of the better coordinator hires in the league, and a move that I am very fond of and have heavy expectations for. And then you look at the rest of the roster for the Rams. They were not without some significant departures this offseason, which is going to leave a lot of spots that we're going to talk about throughout this video of the young players that need to fill into those voids. So you look at the offense, they are going to lose Josh Reynolds. That's not so much a worry, but Gerald Everett, a void at that playmaking spot as their number 2 tight end, is empty. They do lose Cam Akers to an injury this offseason, which took some of the rails off of that running game. They're going to need some of those guys to step up. Their starting center from last year, Austin Blythe, is heading to Kansas City. And then defensively, losing some guys on that defensive front. Michael Brockers gets sent to the Lions. Morgan Fox as well signs a decent contract with the Panthers, a player that had 7 sacks for this team last year. Samson Ebukam has been a reliable player as that hybrid edge outside linebacker for them. And then losing a couple pieces in the secondary as well, as Troy Roy Hill, their starting slot corner, and John Johnson, really a star safety, one of the higher paid free agents, heading to the Browns. So despite getting Matthew Stafford here, this team does have some losses that they're going to need to replace. But they did add some players as well. They just recently acquired Sony Michel to compensate for that Cam Akers injury. They did sign Deshaun Jackson and drafted Tutu Atwell, pairing nicely with that big arm for Matthew Stafford, trying to open up the vertical passing game a little bit. And then they do get a couple of safeties back here from injury last year that should hopefully supplement that John Johnson departure. So Taylor Rapp, who looked like an emerging star safety before injury last year, and Terrell Burgess, who never really got to hit the ground running at all, getting injured before his rookie season got off the ground as a third-round pick last year. So it's not without some additions, but definitely an interesting offseason. And if Matthew Stafford is what he could be here, it's not going to matter that they lose all these players because it's going to be such a big upgrade. And let's go ahead and get into that conversation with my quarterback grade, where the Rams are going to rank 6th in the NFL for me. And I really think that 6th overall ranking speaks volumes about how well I perceive this trade, about how big my expectations are for Matthew Stafford this year, and ultimately is a large justification for why I think the Rams can come in here as the 4th best team in the NFL heading into this season and have very reasonable Super Bowl expectations here. But when you look at what Matthew Stafford brings to the table ahead of what they had in Jared Goff, who, let's just face it, was a limited player who was holding this offense back, and you can really start with just from a scheme fit perspective, why Matthew Stafford makes so much more sense, because the Rams here run a variation of that Shanahan offense that we've talked so much about. So you're going to get those moving pockets. You're going to get really scheming guys open vertical down the field via play action, and you need a quarterback that can be comfortable throwing on the move, resetting moving pockets, and of course having the confidence, arm talent, and accuracy down the field to deliver those deep balls and really open up the offense. And it just wasn't, Jared Goff's true strength. Let's just say that. And that is almost in a nutshell how you would describe Matthew Stafford at his best. So just from a core principle, Matthew Stafford is an upgrade. But to get a little deeper, the McVay version of this Shanahan offense really prefers a lot more 11 personnel, which means a lot more 3 wide receiver personnel out there. Whereas you look at the 49ers under Kyle Shanahan and really around the league, teams like the Browns and the Titans and the Vikings, who have replicated this system around the league, well, for the most part, those teams actually stick with a lot of 12 personnel, a lot more heavy packages. And here for the Rams, they do it in different personnel packages. It's a lot of the same play calls and schemes, but they're doing it with a different personnel grouping. And just by nature of having 3 wide receivers out there, you are going to have the option to have a more diversified route tree and more diverse route combinations here out of those 11 personnel groups. But that doesn't come at a cost. You need a quarterback that can better understand those route combinations, better understand what defenses he's getting, make certain adjustments pre-snap. And of course, with the protection and calling out blitzes, you just have less blockers. You just need a smarter, more experienced quarterback in there. And when you looked at what Jared Goff, quote unquote, brought to the table here, it just wasn't, I think, what Sean McVay ultimately wants to have here. He's comfortable scheming guys open and making things easy on the quarterback, but he wants a guy that can match that intelligence level, really be in sync with what Sean McVay wants, because after 15 seconds, they cut off the communication to the quarterback. The quarterback has to know what McVay would do in those situations, and Matthew Stafford just brings a hell of a lot more experience. He's a quarterback that has played in God knows how many schemes in Detroit, as they have just been a turnstile for offensive coordinators there. So he is going to step in with that experience and be able to bring some of that mental side of the game that Jared Goff just wasn't always bringing here. And then the last bit here is just the obvious one, and that is, well, what happens if the play call isn't perfect? What if the defense does clamp down the design of the play? And that's where Matthew Stafford is going to bring that just high-level elevation when it comes to the improvisation, the out-of-structure stuff. Jared Goff is a quarterback that unfortunately is worse the longer that the play goes on, whether it's a lack of poise in the pocket or a lack of just athletic ability to extend plays and make throws on the move. Well, Matthew Stafford throughout his career, you could actually make a case, and I think a big part of this is because it's been such a mess in Detroit, and the structure and the design of the offense just hasn't been what he's going to get here in the Rams. But for Matthew Stafford, you can make a case that he's actually been a quarterback that is better as the play goes on. He is so comfortable navigating pressure and creating offense that just isn't there. And that is a level to this Rams offense that they have not had under Sean McVay. I personally have MVP bets down on Matthew Stafford, and part of that is the production I think he has paired with the efficiency that this offense is going to offer to him from a scheme fit point of view. I think he can play like a top 5 quarterback this season. And you also get the narrative on top of that. If you're going to win the MVP, you got to have the right narrative. And going from the decrepit Detroit Lions to now potentially being one of the best teams in the NFL and putting up some pretty serious numbers here, that's really what Matthew Stafford brings to the table, man. He just raises the bar. I think the floor is higher, but the ceiling is way higher. And I think it was a great trade that they made to go and get him and really maximize this window where you have Aaron Donald in his prime, you have Jalen Ramsey in his prime, you have some really good receivers here. Go get a quarterback when he becomes available like Matthew Stafford and make it happen. So you got to appreciate the aggressiveness and willingness to try and win a Super Bowl. Don't just settle for being a playoff team every year. As far as the backup situation goes, John Wolford did step in and actually put this team in a position to beat the Seahawks last season in the playoffs. And he offers some mobility and maybe could keep a game afloat here or there, but we just don't know a lot about John Wolford. So the quarterback grade comes in 6th, but obviously Matthew Stafford cannot do this thing alone. So let's talk about the rest of this roster that does have some holes on it and some young players that do need to step up. And one of those position groups that will need to step up is running back here, as they are now going to rank 28th in the NFL following the Cam Akers injury that was really gut-wrenching, and I think took some of the expectations and potential explosiveness out of this running game. You know, Cam Akers was a second-year player and certainly not a proven superstar, but you saw some of the explosiveness that he showed down the stretch last season. Looked like one of, if not their best offensive player, position value aside. And I just would say, they're going to have a good running game here. This scheme and the run blocking and the way that this team operates, it's not that this is going to be a weakness for this team. It's just you're not going to get that Dalvin Cook, that Nick Chubb, a guy that honestly really elevates the running game, which there's only so many running backs in the league, but I think Cam Akers showed flashes of being that guy when you look at his explosiveness coming out of college, then going from the anemic Florida State program with terrible run blocking to the Rams that had one of the better run blocking groups in the league last year. So you look at Darrell Henderson and Sony Michel in here now, there's still going to be a highly productive running game. I would say it's pretty safe that they'll be a top 20 rushing team in the league, because that's just what they do here, and that's what this scheme brings to the table. But the backs themselves, they just aren't amazing. I do like Darrell Henderson. He's probably one of the 32 best running backs in the NFL, but he's right on the cusp there. And then you bring in Sony Michel, who was set to be the 4th-string running back for the Patriots. It was a good group, but just a player that hasn't been the same since that epic Super Bowl run, a former first-round pick that I was never a fan of. I had a 3rd-rounder on Michel coming out, but I do think this is Henderson's backfield. He is an explosive player. He can give you some big runs, but doesn't have that true breakaway speed that a guy like Cam Akers did bring to the table. He has good contact balance. He has developed in his vision and should be poised for a pretty good season this year. And I think Sony Michel behind him is a great complementary back. He has some speed and can do some of the stuff that Darrell Henderson does, similar kind of contact balance, patient style of running. But I think Sony Michel does bring a little bit more of a proven aspect as a receiver, just when it comes to reliability, catching the ball out of the backfield, and more of an ability to run routes and shake linebackers out of the backfield. So I do think that's part of what the Rams saw in Sony Michel and why they made that trade. Personally, not a move I would have made. Sounds like that's going to end up being, 4th-round pick for Sony Michel, who's just kind of a replacement level back at this point. But he is there and fills a void that they needed because Xavier Jones, completely unproven, by all reports has had a good camp and could be a guy to keep an eye on if you get injuries ahead of him, but probably not going to see the field a ton. And then Jake Funk, same thing. Long path to playing time here, but does have some shiftiness. Some similarities to me to James White coming out as a guy that could be a really good 3rd down back. Just really was never able to become a productive running back at Maryland. But at the same time, he didn't really get a lot of opportunities to be a high-end runner as well. So an interesting player that they drafted this year. And if he were to get on the field, definitely a fun player to watch. So 28th at running back. And it's definitely a situation where they are, I guess, reeling. I don't think they're going to suck running the ball. I think they'll be very effective, actually. But certainly making some efforts to atone for a pretty devastating injury in this group. But let's change tone here and talk about the receiving grade, where they're going to rank 8th. Now, I do have a note. I hadn't adjusted my grade from the Cam Akers injury that did give the Bills a slight nod over the Rams. So I think the Bills actually came in 8th for our last deep dive. The Bills are now 7th and the Rams are 8th. So if you're following that, just little explanation on what changed there, but they do rank 8th here for the Rams, and I love the diversity of skill sets you have here. So I mentioned that the Rams do run the Shanahan offense in a lot of ways, being play action, crossing routes, scheming guys open via play action. But what this team does differently is they do that a lot more out of 11 personnel. So you're going to see a guy like Van Jefferson or Deshaun Jackson or Tutu Atwell on the field much more than they would play in, say, San Francisco or Tennessee or Cleveland. But when you are running 11 personnel out of those offenses that really lean on outside zone and just the running game in general and the play action, you need physical players that can do a lot of the things that the tight ends in this offense do for those other teams. So to have a guy like Robert Woods and a guy like Cooper Kupp, who I'm just going to say, he, in a lot of ways, the way they use him schematically, he is a glorified tight end for this offense. Not that he wouldn't be a great slot receiver anywhere he played. I'm just using that as a way to resemble how much value he brings to this team, because Cooper Kupp specifically is such a physical player who is an excellent run blocker, but he's good after the catch, just like your guys like Jonnu Smith and George Kittle and Irv Smith and some of these other smaller tight ends on other teams are able to do. Cooper Kupp fills that void in a lot of ways for this team. Now, they had Gerald Everett in a part of that role as well last year, and I understand that, but Cooper Kupp schematically brings so much to the table, and I do think he is currently the best pure slot receiver in the NFL. And then you have Robert Woods, who's a little bit more of a possession perimeter player, just an uber reliable, consistent guy. He is the ultimate jack of all trades, master of none receiver, as a guy that to me is on that fringe of being a true number 1 receiver and an extremely high-end number 2. He does have some physical limitations. He's not the fastest or biggest player in the world, but he does everything super well and is just an awesome number 1, number 2 guy to have. It is a very solid wide receiver duo, and a big reason this team comes into the top 10. But they have, as I mentioned, a serious diversity of skill sets here. So those two guys play off each other very well. And then you have Van Jefferson, who offers a little bit more of that vertical aspect to this offense. He is not a true burner, but I do think he has somewhere around 4.4 speed. He has excellent release off the line of scrimmage. Some of the best release of any prospect in these last 2 draft classes that have just been loaded with deep threats. I was a huge fan of Van Jefferson. I want to say he was my 6th wide receiver, if not that 7th last year, and I had a 1st to a 2nd round grade on him. Just hasn't gotten a ton of experience. They let Josh Reynolds go, and I think are very comfortable seeing what Van Jefferson can do, and I think he is just a better, more explosive player than Reynolds ever was here, and I was actually frustrated that we didn't get to see more of him last year, because I simply put think he's a better player. I even think his ball skills are better, let alone his ability to beat press and get open deep and run after the catch. So I think they have heavy expectations for Van Jefferson, but you do have Deshaun Jackson here that complicates some things. Now, I like this spot for Jackson because they can just kind of pick his spots. They have 3 really good receivers ahead of him, and they even have a guy like Tutu Atwell, who was a second-round pick, who surely will get involved on some of the jet sweep stuff they do. When you go with these 11 personnel packages, it does allow you to get very creative with pre-snap motion and jet motion and ghost motion and just do crazy stuff with a guy like Tutu Atwell, who's just a uber athletic player with the ball in his hands, who has miles to go as far as his development as a route runner and an actual receiver goes. But you mix in Tutu Atwell in some of these packages, and then you have Deshaun Jackson, who can just be a pure, raw, deep threat here. Now, I don't see him having a super productive season or being a quote-unquote reliable, consistent player for this offense. And part of that is he has just missed so much time. He is a player that clearly cannot stay healthy and hold up over the course of a 17-game season now. But you put him in a role like this where, I don't know, he plays maybe 10 to 12 snaps a game. Maybe he can stay healthy and fresh and keep that speed underneath him. And if he is your 4th, 5th option here, my goodness, that is almost overkill. So I really like the addition of Deshaun Jackson here. I think they'll have a smart plan for him, and they've been a team that's been able to keep players healthy. So I would not be surprised if we're sitting here in the playoffs and Deshaun Jackson has 2 huge plays and is a big part of a playoff run for this team. So that's really your 5. They do have Tristan Jackson, who I'm super excited that he's got a guy like Deshaun to mentor him. My comp for Tristan Jackson coming out was Darius Slayton, a vertical and slant type of perimeter receiver, and to have him as your 6th, I just like him as a developmental piece. So hopefully he makes the team here, and that's really it. They do draft Ben Skowronek in the 7th round. Just, he's kind of a backup to Cooper Kupp as that glorified tight end role. He was one of the best run blocking receivers coming out, but showed on tape and at the Senior Bowl that just not a guy that can separate and really offer anything as a receiver. So kind of a glorified fullback, H-back tight end if he makes the team. And then speaking of tight ends, you have a decent group of tight ends here. You have Tyler Higbee, who this team paid, good player, balanced receiving tight end, has some ability to get open, but just doesn't offer any high-end, elite skill sets at the position. You have Johnny Munt, who's kind of stepped up. He's an undersized player, and he is used as kind of that wing option. He's going to compete with Bryson Hopkins, who was my number 1 tight end last year, for the Gerald Everett role. Now, Everett was an undersized player himself, and this is where you do go 12 personnel still in this offense. It's not all 11 personnel. So these are going to be the guys that are kind of flexed off the line of scrimmage. You hope get matched up with your thinner outside linebackers and safeties, and the fact that they are 235, 240 pounds doesn't hold them back as much as blockers, but then you get to see that speed show up from an undersized guy like Munt or Hopkins, where you can run away from those linebackers and offer something after the catch. So both those guys are great fits for what they need for that second role, but if they needed to step in for the Tyler Higbee role as the true number 1 tight end and be a full-size blocking tight end, probably not going to bring so much to the table. And Jacob Harris, another converted receiver project here that they'd spent a pretty high pick on. They spent, a 4th round pick on Jacob Harris. So they're going to be investing in his development here. But man, his tape was not impressive. He was a complete undraftable prospect until an amazing workout revealed his physical, athletic ability, learning a new position, and frankly, if he stayed at receiver, he still would have needed to learn that position as well. He's no release, no ball skills, no route running, and clearly going to have to learn how to block. So I don't expect anything from him, but an interesting pick that I'm excited to see what a coach like Sean McVay can do getting his hands on him. And then the running back room, it's fine. I think Cam Akers was going to offer a true explosive aspect and potential to be one of the 10 best receiving backs in the NFL. And you're just not going to get that here. Darrell Henderson is a sure-handed player for the most part and has some ability in space, some contact balance, but not a high-end receiving back. Sony Michel does some very nice things, and maybe in a situation removed from James White, who was the primary receiving back in New England, we do get to see him really shine. There were analysts out there that saw flashes of Alvin Kamara for Sony Michel coming out, so maybe he has a career renaissance as a receiving back. It could happen. I wouldn't be all that surprised, but it's certainly not likely. So we mentioned Jake Funk as well, having some upside as a receiving back if we were to see him. But you can tell there's a serious diversity of skill sets. You've got, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different options here of real playmakers for this offense. You don't have that elite guy to get this into the top 5 conversation for me, but they are not going to be hurting for explosiveness and options in this receiving game. And it's a big part of my optimism for Stafford and this team as a whole. Then you get to the offensive line, and it's okay. There's actually some pretty major question marks here, but there's a lot to like as well. So they rank 18th for me on the offensive line, which honestly might be a little bit better than some people thought they'd come in. So you go from left to right. You bring back Andrew Whitworth, who will turn 40 years old by the end of this year, which is just insane. He has been a player that just defies age, and I don't want to doubt him because I've done it before, and that was 4 years ago at 36 years old when I thought his game would fall off, and it just hasn't as long as he's been on the field. Of course, he was injured in the playoffs, kind of rushed back last year, and held up okay, but wasn't the same. So getting back fully healthy here looks primed to be one of the best left tackles in football. At 40 years old, how much can you expect that to continue? It's an outlier, man. It's an absolute outlier. He has been that throughout his career. But I did put that down arrow next to him because I think it's real to question a 40-year-old tackle playing like a top 5 tackle coming off a significant injury. So it's something to note. Not that I'm really worried about him sucking, but is he going to be an elite player? I don't know. I think that's a real question. You have David Edwards at left guard, and I want to say Austin Corbett at right guard. I kind of lump these guys together because both of these guys quietly had very nice kind of breakout seasons last year. There wasn't a strong idea of who was going to fill into those guard spots and if anybody was going to fill in, and both of these guys emerged as fantastic run blockers. Corbett, kind of a street free agent pickup for them, or a guy that was cut by the Browns, I think. And then David Edwards, a converted tackle prospect. So both these guys kind of surprising and emerging as phenomenal run blockers for them, and players that continue to develop as pass protectors as well. Both athletic guys and players with that mean streak as run blockers. And just a couple of underrated players there that are definitely trending up that I think a lot of fans maybe weren't so much aware of their emergence last season. So that's a huge sign of optimism, what those guys brought to the table. You do have Brian Allen at center, who started, I think, every game in 2019, and it was not really pretty for him from a pass protection standpoint. Very undersized player, about 6'2", 300 pounds, was not a good pass protector coming out of Michigan State either, but a guy with athleticism and run blocking ability. If that pass protection takes a slight step up, you're going to get a good replacement for Austin Blythe, but that's maybe the biggest question for this team as a whole is Brian Allen himself, and how much can he step up? And if he doesn't, do you slide a Corbett inside, move some pieces around? They have minimal depth to do that we'll talk about. But then your right tackle is very solid, Rob Havenstein, who bounced back after a down year in 2019. Again, a Wisconsin player with that mean streak as a run blocker, and a player that has solidified his pass protection technique and developed very nicely in the pros. So you've got a lot to work with here. You've got some question marks maybe as far as Whitworth. Is he going to be an elite player? How good can Brian Allen be? And how much can you count on Edwards and Corbett to repeat their breakout seasons from last year and continue to grow? All legitimate questions, but it should still be a very solid offensive line, if not a great one. We mentioned the depth being pretty lackluster here. You do have Joseph Joel Noteboom, who filled in at left tackle very nicely with Whitworth's injury last year, and he's an athletic player and a guy that this team spent a third-round pick on coming out of, I believe it was TCU. And you like to see that development, and it gives you optimism that if Whitworth can't stay healthy or long-term, you eventually let Whitworth go, considering he's 40 years old, you have an option to maybe step in to that role, a guy that's familiar with the scheme. Almost no tackle depth after that. You do have Tremaine Akram, who was a 7th round pick, a 6'2" tackle. Could play some guard, I suppose. That's really it. Bobby Evans has played some decent time here, but has looked pretty lackluster when he's been out there. And then it's really a drop off after that. There's not a lot of depth to lean on here, especially on the interior. And these guys got to stay healthy, just as they did last year. So the offense as a whole ranks 5th, and a big part of that is my 4th overall grade on this offensive coaching staff. I do see Sean McVay as one of the premium offensive minds in the NFL. I love that he uses a scheme that is so popular around the league, but he is really keen on of innovation, I should say, and doing his own thing and throwing defenses for a loop so that they aren't just planning for the Niners and just expecting the same stuff. So he brings a lot of that, and it's a good scheme, and he's a great coach, just gets along with his players so well. He's a great leader and is so good at communicating what he wants from his players. So they rank 4th for offensive coaching, 5th for overall offense, paired with a high quarterback grade, excellent receiving room, and an offensive line that should be solid. And then we've talked about the scheme. It is that Shanahan offense with McVay's own twists. But let's go ahead and get into this defense that was the number 1 defense in the NFL last season, but as we saw, undergoing a lot of changes here, both with a new defensive coordinator, with Raheem Morris coming in, and a lot of staff changes as well. So we're going to start up front with the run defense, where they are going to rank 17th in the league. And part of this is by design. They're similar to the Bills we talked about, where they go light and really are okay with, basically asking the other team to beat them via the run. They play very conservative quarters coverages, don't get beat over the top, that kind of thing. It's kind of that modern bend, don't break style defense. And I actually really like that approach for a modern team that has an offense like the Rams have, or an offense like the Bills have, where it's like, yeah, just don't get gushed. And that's kind of what they plan on here, and they do a really good job. And I'm assuming for all of this, really, that just as we've heard, that Raheem Morris is going to really pick up with the philosophies and schemes that Brandon Staley kind of left in place here. He's even picking up the verbiage and all that stuff. So I really appreciate that, and that's just more forward thinking from McVay and the most forward thinking organization in the NFL, really, with everything we just mentioned there. But you start up front, Sebastian Joseph Day, emerging in his 2nd season as a contributor for this team, is drafted in 2018, but has developed super nicely as a 6th round pick out of Rutgers. Just a sound nose tackle when this team does go base, but should continue to grow and be a reliable run defender up front for this team. You have A'Shawn Robinson next to him, good veteran who I think when he wants to be can play really good run defense, just hasn't had that consistent grading profile as a run defender, but certainly a player that they believe in, having kept him around here, letting a guy like Brockers go. And then, of course, Aaron Donald, the best player in the NFL. We will, of course, continue to talk about what he brings to the table as a pass rusher, but his dominance as a rusher definitely overshadows the fact that he's still probably the best run defending player in the NFL as well. Just his combination of IQ, speed, strength, quickness, you name it, it is unblockable both in the run and against the pass. So he almost single-handedly makes this a top 20 run defense, because it's not like amazing around him, but when you have to account for a player like that, it just elevates everybody so much. You cannot understate what he offers to this front 7. And then the depth, you got Greg Gaines, really solid young nose tackle, continuing to develop. I love that pick coming out, and he's had a nice start to his career. Nothing amazing, but a good 4th piece to rotate in there. You got a couple undersized developmental pieces there, guys like Copeland and Brown. I think even Banks there, kind of your Aaron Donald backups, I guess, as more undersized interior defensive end types. And then Bobby Brown being a 4th round pick this year out of Texas A&M. Interesting prospect. And for a team that's developed guys like Sebastian Joseph Day, definitely someone to keep an eye on. If you were to just manufacture what a 3-down defensive tackle should physically look like coming out, that's Bobby Brown. Actually, the way he moves and the way he's built reminds me in a lot of ways of Kenny Clark, and he's got the same get-off as well. Now, Clark is just so much more refined and was coming out. That's why Clark was a 1st-round pick and Brown was a 4th. But there are a lot of tools to work with there with Bobby Brown. I feel like we say this guy's a freak athlete and he looks the part. We say that stuff too often. Bobby Brown really does just look the part. He just needs to put everything together. So good pick in the 4th round. Excited to see how they develop him. And then you go to the edge. It's a decent hybrid group. You've got Leonard Floyd, who is not a powerful player and can get overwhelmed at times, but for the most part is schemed up nicely to use his length and quickness to just be that edge contain guy. He's got great speed to the sideline and plays with good discipline. So he's been a good player for them. They just paid him a lot of money to stick around here. So they like what he brings to the table. And then you have Justin Hollins, who's used in a lot of similar ways on the opposite side. A guy that's been kind of a hybrid player coming out of Oregon, didn't work out in Denver, but finds a home here in a great scheme fit. The way they use him, was a similar scheme for Denver as well, so they probably just missed on what he could be utilized as. But anyway, similar player with a ton of length. He's like 6'5", I think just under 250 pounds. So not a lot of power, but uses that length and quickness to get off blocks as opposed to more of your traditional getting those hands inside and shedding. So apply that more to Hollins and Leonard Floyd. But both guys, really great versatility in coverage as well. They can do some nice schematic things here, just neither dominant forces as run defenders, but certainly not liabilities either. As far as the depth goes, you've got some interesting pieces still to go. You've got Terrell Lewis, who hasn't been able to stay healthy, but he is a functional 3-down player if he could just stay on the field. You've got Agbanya Okoronkwo. Excited to see him potentially get some more opportunities here. He's been kind of buried behind Samson Abukum, but a very similar player, undersized edge piece, who's had some experience playing off ball as well. Uber quick. Some of the best agility and bendiness for any edge guy in recent memory coming out. But just, again, undersized, so not a true 3-down pass rusher, but in a role like Justin Hollins has here, could still have something to show. Just a guy that hasn't gotten all those opportunities, a 5th-round pick in 2018 in a contract year. Justin Lawler hasn't been able to get on the field here, and then a couple of guys in Garrett and Daka. We'll see if they make the team. The linebacker room is not very good, and we'll reveal that linebacker grade here shortly. But Kenny Young, just kind of a see-ball, hit-ball style of linebacker, a full steam ahead, speedy linebacker, has shown some flashes, but just not a lot of discipline there, not a consistent tackler, and not an aggressive or really just physical run defender, I should say. And Troy Reeder next to him has shown some nice flashes. He's a guy with more size and headiness as a player, so we'll see if he continues to grow or if he can even hold on to this job. But the linebacker group in general is not an emphasis for this defense, very clearly, and it's reflected by the rankings here. Micah Keyz hasn't really worked out. Howard's kind of a converted safety. They do spend a 3rd-round pick on Ernest Jones here. Slightly rich for my blood, but definitely a draftable prospect with some athleticism. Not ready to play now, but we could see some growth here. But that's your run defense. It ranks 17th. Really highlighted by guys like Joseph Day, Donald, maybe what those edge guys can do. But for the most part, they are okay if you run the ball a little bit on them, as long as they aren't getting gashed. And I don't think you will be getting gashed when they have a good front 4 or front 5 like that. So let's move on to the pass rush, which is much more exciting, where they rank 3rd. And of course, that's going to start with Aaron Donald, who is the only player that will be receiving a grade north of 100 for me. I gave Aaron Donald a grade of 104 because I think you have to do that to emphasize how much better he is than anybody else in the NFL. If you just look alone at how much better Aaron Donald is than anybody at his position group of interior defensive line, it is hilarious. But then you stack him up and see that his pressure numbers, his sack numbers, his impact on a defense, the amount of double teams he demands, it is up there with the all-time greats and above the all-time greats. I think you can actually make a pretty strong case that Aaron Donald is the best football player ever, and I don't say that lightly. He single-handedly makes this the 3rd best pass rush because for the simple fact of if he is one-on-one, he is sacking the quarterback in about a second and a half because he's playing at a position that's closer to the quarterback, being at the interior, and he has the same speed and quickness of guys like TJ Watt. So it's just unfair, honestly, that a player like Aaron Donald exists. He's a complete outlier. People have been trying to find this player, and guys like Ed Oliver and Solomon Thomas, who are 6'2", 280 pounds, who can play inside and have the same quickness and power, and it just, you can't replicate Aaron Donald. And then you got some other pieces around him. You have a Leonard Floyd who's far from a dominant edge player, but as a number 2 pass rusher, he's a good player. He ended up with 55 pressures last year. Now, how much of that is the Aaron Donald effect? We saw the year before that Dante Fowler have a career year. He got a huge contract, almost identical to what Leonard Floyd got here for the Falcons, and he vanished off the face of the earth. So it's a fair question to ask, how much does Leonard Floyd create on his own? But as a guy that's never really getting a lot of attention, he can focus on those one-on-ones. He can focus on his contain and bending around the edge, and you get a good number 2 rusher here. One guy to keep an eye on here is Terrell Lewis, who actually has a really nice skill set as a pass rusher. He has the ideal kind of athletic length profile, about 6'5", 250 pounds, looks the part, as we talked about with Bobby Brown. But he has excellent technique. He's got a great spin move. He's got bend around the edge and some power in there with his length. His problem, going back to Alabama, has been health, and that surfaced, unfortunately, in his first year for the Rams. So they rolled the dice on a Terrell Lewis, who, without the injury questions, almost assuredly would have been a first-round pick. Now he's healthy right now. I think he played about 30 snaps week 3 of the preseason. So if he's out there, he could elevate this pass rush and make this thing look even more scary, but that is incredibly difficult to lean on. Sebastian Joseph Day can get some push on the inside, and he's a player that, he has some athletic traits in there. If he continues to develop and becomes a decent number 2 rusher, wouldn't surprise me, but he's not that right now. A'Shawn Robinson, just not someone to count on as a pass rusher at this point in his career. Just hasn't shown that development and consistency gains, just not the athleticism to efficiently get after the quarterback. Keep an eye on guys like Copeland and Brown, who have some of that quickness on the inside. And then we mentioned Bobby Brown as well, who has the athletic ability to turn into a good pocket-pushing power rusher in the likes, physically speaking, of guys like Fletcher Cox and Kenny Clark, again, that is strictly speaking on physical potential. That is not something that has surfaced in his game on the field. And then on the edge, Hollins, kind of just that, rotational, early down edge player, honestly. Just not much of a pass rushing skill set. It's why he's had a hard time sticking. Now, he'll be out there a lot because of what he does dropping into coverage and as a run defender, and especially if Terrell Lewis can't stay healthy. It's not like they have a lot of other options. I would say Agbanya Okoronkwo has more potential to be a better pass rusher than Hollins because he at least has elite get-off and bend and some moves that he's strung together going back to his college days. Lawler, again, hasn't really been able to earn any playing time here. Not going to expect that to happen now, and that's really it. So the depth is almost non-existent here. Another group that has to stay healthy, but as long as Aaron Donald is out there, you're going to get one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. It really is that simple, and we don't need to overcomplicate it. He was Defensive Player of the Year for a reason. But now the linebacker grade, 32nd in the NFL, and that shouldn't be a surprise. These guys just aren't really starting caliber players. You got Kenny Young, who just hasn't had that development. Anytime you see an athletic player like this get traded away from Baltimore, who seems to develop any sort of guy that shows potential, that shows a little red flag. And we've kind of seen that with Kenny Young. There's just not a lot of consistency there, virtually no coverage ability, just not a very good player. There's no way around it. He is going to start, and he's going to show some flashes, but not a player that you really want to lean on, and unfortunately this team is going to have to. You have Troy Reeder, who really emerged last year after looked like, I think Micah Keyz went down for injury, and Reeder didn't really look back. He earned that job, and really is the best linebacker out of this group, though it seems they like Kenny Young's athleticism a little bit more. But for the most part, Reeder, heady player that lacks some of the quickness in coverage and just lacks some of that high-end experience, but was a decent player for them. Probably shouldn't be a starter. Maybe he ascends to that level, but again, just not a player you really would like to count on here. Micah Keyz, I feel like he's kind of flaming out. He's shown some flashes. I liked him coming out, but never was a high-end athlete, especially when you look at his lateral agility and just ability to move in short areas. I think that has held him back, but just hasn't developed the mental side of his game. You've got Travin Howard, still a converted safety project, and Ernest Jones, who was a third-round pick. Good athleticism, but not a player that had great tape coming out, really just gambling on the athletic traits and good coaching here to develop him. We could even see Ernest Jones this year because the guys ahead of him are so poor. If Young is really sucking, not a lot of reasons to keep Ernest Jones on the bench if he's just as raw of a player and he's younger with potentially even more athletic upside. And then you got Roseboom out of one of the Dakota schools. And that's your linebacker group, ranking 32nd in the league. Now, schematically, they do a good job to not lean on these guys all that much. They do a really good job of rotating their safeties around in the middle of the field, which eliminates how much these guys have to do in coverage. And of course, a guy like Aaron Donald is going to open everything up front, so these guys don't have to handle as much from a stack and shed inside run defense perspective. But yeah, needless to say, it is not a good linebacker group, and clearly the Rams are okay with that because they almost never invest in this unit. But it gets much better as we talk about this secondary that has one of the best starting lineups in the NFL. I have some pretty serious questions about the depth here, but you have one of the top corner duos in the league, Jalen Ramsey and Darius Williams. We all know about Jalen Ramsey, the most athletically gifted corner in the NFL with the size and speed to match up on anybody, and he's technically sound and super smart in zone coverage. Outside of maybe Jair Alexander in man coverage, pretty much the undisputed best corner in the NFL. And then you have Darius Williams, who, if he is not on your radar by now, you simply need to pay more attention to the Rams, because Darius Williams was a breakout star last year. And not just for this team, he has really paved the way for some other smaller corners around the league. You look at a DJ Reed in Seattle and Asante Samuel getting a lot of buzz for the Brandon Staley Chargers. Not just those two. It is a trend around the league. 5'9", 5'10" corners, teams that have traditionally stayed away from guys that lack that length. Well, you put them in a system where they don't press. They play off the ball. They play that quarters off-man zone coverage, where they just use their quickness, their acceleration, and their mind to read route concepts and jump routes. That is what Darius Williams does at an elite level, and he's here to stay. I think they're going to do everything they can to retain him in a contract season, a trendsetter, and a player that needs to be on your radar as a phenomenal number 2 corner in the NFL. Now, after those two, it's nothing but question marks. David Long in the slot is a super quick player that I like and has gotten some reps and not gotten lost, but this will be his first go as a full-time starter in the slot. Anytime that happens, you're going to have some question marks. But definitely a player I liked, a pick that I praised several years ago, and there's no reason he can't emerge as a high-end slot corner as they let Troy Hill go here. But of course, you're going to have some question marks there. So he does get the green arrow up. I have confidence in him, but it just, it throws a little uncertainty in this secondary, especially when you don't have any sort of veteran option to lean on after him. You have Dante Dion, another really small 5'9", 170-pound corner, trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice with Darius Williams as an undrafted pickup. But it is still unlikely. And then Robert Rochelle, a 4th-round pick with a ton of athleticism, really not ready to play, but if you have any injuries anywhere, you're probably leaning on him. You have Kareem Orr, Hall, and Alumba. It's the thinnest secondary in the NFL to cap off a defense that's already been pretty thin to this point. And then you go to the safety group, and it's not quite as rosy. It's a good, smart duo of Jordan Fuller and Taylor Rapp, but just not a group with a lot of athletic upside. You have 2 guys with below 4.6 speed. You're just not getting a lot of range and honestly man-to-man ability there. Now, they're going to stick with that quarters cover 4 system that is much more about communication and not blowing assignments. And these guys are going to be 2 of the best in the league at not doing that. So schematically speaking, it's nice, but when you got to lean on their athletic traits, it's just not going to shine through. So they're good players and far from liabilities. And in Taylor Rapp's case, I think he is a little bit quicker and more upside as a run defender and coming up in the box and being a man coverage player with some of that quickness. But for the most part, you're just not getting elite safety play here. but a little bit more time on them. Jordan Fuller was a 6th-round pick for this team last year and really emerged through the woodworks quickly. Fell in the draft because of that 40 time. I think he maybe could have been in the 4.7s, honestly. And it's not that speed shows up on tape, but he is one of those guys that's a step ahead. He's already one of the smarter safeties in the league and communicates extremely well on the back end of this defense. So that's what they like about him so much. A player that did that at Ohio State. He was a true free safety for them and just didn't give up a lot of big plays. And we mentioned that. That's what they want to do here, is not give up big plays. But Fuller also not a guy that's going to create a lot of plays either, if that makes sense. And Rapp is fairly similar. Different style. He's a guy that's played a lot more strong safety. Now these guys are going to be, a complete quarters coverage duo where one play, one guy will be coming down and the next play he'll be playing up over the top. So it's not so much a free safety, strong safety deal here, but just from a skill set perspective, Rapp a little bit better as a tackler, a little more quickness to maybe cover tight ends if they do go cover one and stuff. So just something to keep in mind there, but I do like Taylor Rapp. He's uber instinctive, one of the smarter prospects to come out in a long time, and just one of those safeties that feels like he's always around the ball. So he does get that green arrow, and he showed some nice things last year before injury, and they should be excited about him. He could fill in eventually to what John Johnson gave them, who, by the way, is also another safety with like 4.6 speed. So this system does not demand speed from these safeties, but it is worth noting that these guys are not burners. Behind him, you got Terrell Burgess, who was a 3rd-round pick last year, played in that strong safety role for a cover 3 Utah defense, and kind of learning a new role and a new scheme here, and needs to show more, obviously, having not played last year. So a young player that they like with some upside that we just don't know a lot about what he can do at the next level. You got Nick Scott, who actually stepped in and played a rotational role for this team last year. Might be something there, an undersized player with some quickness. Juju Hughes, J.R. Reed, Jake Gervais. These guys probably competing for a 5th safety spot. I can't imagine they keep 6th. You also have Fred Warner's brother there and Troy Warner. So certainly some more safety depth than corner depth. But for the most part, you're looking at significant drop-offs after the starting 5. And this group, we've said it before, but this group especially has got to stay healthy because you could have some serious weak links rather quickly. But I do like the starting 5, and that's what gets them to be a very solid 11th ranked secondary in the NFL. So what does this all mean with the new staff and some of these moving pieces? What kind of defense are we talking about? Well, right now they're going to rank 11th, which is a pretty big drop-off from the number 1 defense from last year, but you're hoping some of the improvements on offense can more than compensate for that, and then maybe some slight improvements to some of those question marks we mentioned, and you're looking at a top 10 defense paired with a top 5 offense, obviously something that can win a Super Bowl here for the Rams, and it doesn't take that much imagination. Also, the defensive coaching only ranks 18th because we just haven't seen a ton from Raheem Morris. Now, that's pretty high ranking for a newly hired defensive coordinator that, again, we just haven't seen a ton from. But I do have a lot of confidence in him, and he could emerge as another Brandon Staley-style hire. Sean McVay can't seem to miss with his staff, and I think they got another good one. So that's another area where, right now I'm projecting Raheem Morris to be a very good defensive coordinator. If he comes out like Brandon Staley last year and is this elite schemer and is elite at getting on the same page with these guys, that could very quickly just push this into a top 10 defense. So another thing to keep an eye on there. The home field here is one of the worst in the league, and it's not a team that I expect to have elite crowd noise and, generate some unbelievable advantage to this pass rush. It might play into their favor as a defensive scheme that relies more on communication, but I do think that this is the most noteworthy home field this year because last year nobody had a home field this year, right? Well, now just the Rams and maybe the Chargers won't really have a home field. So it's something to monitor as the year goes on, is what kind of advantage does that sway for this defense. But the scheme is a 3-4 Vic Fangio quarters coverage defense. We've talked about a ton of cover 4 here. They won't shy away from man coverage when they feel like they can run it. But for the most part, you're talking about a bend, don't break, a lot of cover 4, cover 6, mixing in some of those hybrid zone coverages. But that's your defense for the most part, is we can assume that Raheem Morris is going to pick this team up where they left off. So a overall team recap now before we get into the schedule and my Vegas over-under win total projections for this team. We mentioned 5th offense, 11th defense. Special teams, very, very solid. You got one of the best kicker-punter duos in the league. You got return man. A guy like Tutu Atwell could emerge as a premium return man. And this is a team that is very well coached from a tackling and special teams perspective under special teams coordinator Joe DeCameli. I probably butchered that. And then the culture is outstanding here. It's a huge part of why they rank 4th is you talk about player development, coaching, and culture and earning the benefit of the doubt. The Rams have shown some of the best of that over the last couple of years, and I don't expect that to change. I think that is part of what Sean McVay brings to the table ahead of most coaches is he just gets guys to buy in. He has that it factor as a head coach, that Bill Parcells style, culture building mentality. And you love that about a young coach in Sean McVay, and that's not going anywhere anytime soon. So that definitely is an underrated aspect of this Rams team. You look at the strengths and weaknesses overall, offensive coaching, as we just mentioned, a total strength for this team, paired with the upside now at quarterback with Matthew Stafford. The receiving versatility for this team is going to give defenses headaches. You've got speed, you've got size, you can do pretty much anything with this group of receivers and tight ends. And then Aaron Donald, of course, just alone gives you around a top 10 defense just on his presence alone. You pair in some other stuff and hopefully have getting back to a top 10 defense next year. And then the starting secondary is a strength for this team. Meanwhile, the depth on defense, notably in the secondary, is going to be a weakness. That starting secondary is very solid, but they have got to stay healthy. And then the linebacking group, while it's not a big focus for this scheme, it is the worst group of linebackers in the NFL. So with that said, let's look at this team's schedule. What are my expectations for this team? Having ranked 4th in the league, obviously, their over-under is 10.5 wins, and I am going to go over on this one. I actually have them at 13-4, but that is my best-case scenario projection, as I have them getting some tough wins in here. At Indianapolis, week 2, that could be iffy depending on Wentz and Quentin Nelson. And then Tampa Bay at home, week 3. I do have them winning that game, but that is going to be a very good, very close game in week 3 there. Beating Tennessee at home, winning back-to-back games at the end of the season as well, at Minnesota, at Baltimore. It's pretty unlikely that they win all of those games and only lose their 4 hardest road games, as I have painted here. But when it comes to what games they'll be favored in, I do think it plays out that way, and honestly, in Tampa Bay's case, I have to pick a couple spots for them to lose because I don't think that team goes 17-0, so that's part of what this is about. So at the end of the day, without going game by game, I have them at 13-4. That is a best case scenario. You know, this team doesn't have a lot of depth, and they do have a lot of moving pieces, so that is going to take their floor down to about 9 wins. Not to mention, this is not a particularly easy schedule. So I think 13 is a best case scenario picture here, but I do think they get over 10.5 wins. This is a team that I'm very optimistic in. I'm willing to give them a lot of benefit of the doubt with Sean McVay and really how well they've done at kind of having different pieces step up and surprise, whether it's a Sebastian Joseph day, whether it's guys like Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp kind of emerging as star players. That was not something we saw coming. A guy like Justin Holland stepping up on the edge. Of course, you look at a Darius Williams. Like, this team just goes on, and you look at the staff that just continuously gets pumped out here. They just breed excellence for the Rams, and they're definitely a team, as reflected by that culture grade, that, yeah, they've got question marks. They've got guys that got to step up here and there. But I have a ton of confidence in this team to do that, as is reflected by my 13-win projection at this point in time. I believe, have a Super Bowl future on this team. It's not my biggest bet of the year, But this is a team that I think if the defense comes together a little bit and Stafford looks as good as I think he will, certainly a team that can go on a run and win a Super Bowl this season. So that's not something I would shy away from. And that's going to do it for this deep dive. I really hope you guys enjoyed. We've got 3 more of these things to do. I will be wrapping these up throughout the week. So Wednesday, we'll get our number 3 team. Friday will be our number 2 team. And Sunday will be our number 1 team. Wrapping up this deep dive series. Hope you guys enjoyed. Please do hit that like button down below. Drop a comment what you think. And we'll see you in a couple days for the next deep dive. Peace out.